This woman's husband ended up significantly downsizing his career from a compensation perspective because they figured out that he didn't actually need all that money, that they could live on something different. But all that is outside of the numbers, right? The math doesn't solve your problems. Your behavior solves your problems.
Welcome to How Did We Get Here, the podcast where each week our two talking heads, being myself, Jess Bost,
And Mark Newfield,
bring on guests to learn more about their past 5 jobs before landing where they are today.
Because, as you know, life is super simple, straightforward, and never makes people ask, wait, you did what?
Join us for an honest convo on career exploration, overcoming setbacks, considering when to pivot, and offering encouragement on how to find value in your career and life choices.
And with that, let's ask the question.
Holy crap, how did I get here? Together. And we're back. Today, we're going to be talking about financial planning needs in your 20s, 30s, 40s, really anything before that later retirement period. And if you're anywhere in that age range, you might have already realized that just because it's not time to retire yet doesn't mean that you don't need professional advice.
And I would add on to that, I think most of the people that we as financial advisors and planners talk to, and I bet Meg would reinforce this, Meg Bartelt, who this session is with, is they can't even conceive of the word retire. They probably don't even use the word retire. But to kick this all off, we chatted with Meg Bartelt, who has crafted a practice, her entire business around this age group of people and their specific planning needs.
Meg, as you'll come to find out, is an amazingly down-to-earth person. She's got tons of life experience in the tech industry, in yoga even, prior to switching gears and becoming a financial planner.
Me personally, I kind of just, the shorthand is I am a middle-aged mother who owns a business. And so any stereotypes that you associate with that description are probably true. So I think the biggest thing I do outside of running this business and being a mom and a wife is I have a yoga practice, and I've had it since my early 20s, which means at this age, I have been doing yoga for a quarter century, which sounds simultaneously impressive and very old. Yeah, so that's me personally. I live in Bellingham, Washington, which is 90 miles north of Seattle. My husband and I met when we were in San Francisco, and then we're sort of a bit itinerant, trying to find a place where we wanted to fully settle and call home. That journey involved 2 cross-country trips, one of which was with a 2-month-old baby, and one of which was 3 months long and with a 1 and a 4-year-old, which I'm very glad to have done and would not recommend that to anyone because that was hell. Yeah, and then professionally, I'm a career changer. I was in the tech industry, hence the Bay Area. And in my early 30s, just kind of got bored with it. It wasn't sort of doing anything for me anymore, to put it casually. And that's when I sort of discovered financial planning, which I didn't really know of as a profession prior to that. But I'd say if there's any area in the country where it is good to discover and get into, especially the fee-only financial planning profession, it is the Bay Area. Really robust professional community there. And worked sort of, my husband and I have been lucky in that between the two of us, we've never had 2 full-time jobs. So while I was making this career transition and having 2 babies, I was working very part-time in this profession. And then a few years later, when I discovered that I could not get a job doing the kind of financial planning I wanted to do with the kind of people I wanted to do it with, that's when I launched my firm.
And I know, Jess, you caught that part about how Meg felt like she couldn't do the kind of financial planning she wanted to do with the kind of people she wanted to do it with. And by that, I mean old people like me, right? One of my favorite kinds of financial planners are people like Meg, whose life experiences give them a deep understanding of specific needs that just weren't being well served. And so, like any true entrepreneur, she just took it upon herself to find a way to help.
Yeah, the 30s were a lot. I mean, that's what I observe in all my clients too, or, a lot of them, at least. You get married, you have kids, you change careers, you buy your house, you move, blah, blah, blah. It's just You just throw the deck of life cards up into the air and see where they fall.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Michael Kitces chart? I'm sure you have, that shows all of the financial decisions and transitions that you make in your 30s and 40s versus the retirement period.
It's an incredibly validating
It is.
graphic.
It is.
Because most of the talk in this profession is about issues pertaining to pre-retirees and retirees.
Mhm.
And there is sort of, I think for a long time, and maybe still in the broader industry, this sense of what do you even do for people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s? And then you start working with those people and you're like, well, what you do is you talk with them constantly. Because their life is constantly changing.
I also appreciated how she started with what she was passionate about, which was financial planning for people mid-career. But then she also allowed the client's feedback to help shape what was important to them too, and for her to build into her practice.
I mean, as I would sort of glibly say, like, rich people need love too. Like, rich old people need love too. I just didn't want to be the one to give it to them. I wanted to work more with people in their 30s, 20s, 30s, and 40s for the same reason, right? We're sort of affinity groups. You want to work with people who are like you. And where I ended up in Bellingham, there are a few fee-only shops. I did want to stay in the fee-only world. Very investment-oriented, not, from what I could tell, lead with investing, maybe some planning on the back end. That wasn't as interesting to me philosophically or intellectually.
Yeah.
Right. You are interested in providing real financial advice for real humans from a real human, I think.
Yes, I am. And a particular set of real humans. Now, I will say one of the things I've discovered over the years, I used to sort of poo-poo like, investing, it's a solved problem. Why would anyone ever spend time talking about investing with their clients? Blah, blah, blah. And that has been one of the things I've had to learn somewhat painfully is people actually care a lot about their investing. It excites them. It scares them. They want to talk about their investments, and sort of my background of like, comprehensive financial planning. Financial planning is where the value is. That was a rude awakening when I had some of my wealthier clients basically say, hey, Meg, the most important thing you do for me is manage my money. Like, yes, I love all this other stuff that you provide, but this is the most important thing. I was like, oh, whoops. You know?
Add tax planning to that, and then it's astounding how what's important to people changes when their asset base changes. Whether those are public or private investments, doesn't
and
matter.
You expect retirees to have a bunch of money. That's sort of where the whole AUM fee model, works or applies. When you're working with a 35-year-old, you don't normally expect that. But then I specialize in sort of the IPO process. And so you end up having a bunch of people who, after an
Right.
IPO, have anywhere from $2 to $15 million. And that could be it for the rest of their lives if they are sort of prudent with it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, one of the very interesting parts of the conversation was her supposition going in that this is a very engineering mindset. I know, coming out of the tech business, the investing problem is solved. And her clients told her very clearly that that's not the way they look at it. So let's talk about how she got here.
In terms of my first career, I think it had everything to do with when I graduated from college. I graduated from college in 1998, peak of the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
Now, I graduated from a college right outside of Boston, and it was very good at bringing recruiters on campus. So I just went to a bunch of interviews. I remember I got rejected by Goldman Sachs, which at the time, I was like, man, that does not feel good. And of course, as soon as I entered this profession, I was like, oh, thank God. Because that would not have been a path through this industry that I would have enjoyed. Yeah, so I basically just took a job that took me out to the Bay Area. I was working for an IT consulting firm as a business analyst, which could mean anything. I was not passionate about it, but it was a job that took me out to the Bay Area. It was reasonable. And then I got laid off 2 years later when the dot-com bust happened. And because of who I knew, I was, dating a guy at the time who had just gotten a job at this startup. So he connected me with the startup. And so I got a new job there as a technical writer, which I've been actually taking classes at UC Berkeley Extension in technical writing. So I got a job there as a technical writer. And so that remained my career for the next 7 or so years. And, I'm sure both of you can agree, it feels good to learn new skills and learn new knowledge in and of itself, sort of independent of what that knowledge is. And so there is satisfaction in the career growth, getting this professional certificate in technical writing, getting better at my craft. But ultimately, I just didn't give a rip about the work I was doing, the jobs, the companies I was working for. At some point near the end of my career in tech, I thought, oh, I'll go out on my own. Instead of being an employee, I will go do contract work. I'll have more control. Maybe I can make some more money. Having no clue how to run a business, no clue that being a consultant means you are a business owner first and a service provider second. And so that sort of like fizzled pretty quickly. And that's when I discovered financial planning and started making the career transition. And as for yoga, I'm not even sure. I think I took my first class in college. My brother, who's 4 years my senior, had long taken yoga and had become a yoga instructor. My dad had had a meditation practice since his graduate school. So we were sort of like the weird family. And in Southeastern Virginia, not a lot of people did transcendental meditation and yoga, but my family did. And so I just discovered yoga then, and it felt great. Like I've got scoliosis, and yoga just makes me feel good. So it's sort of no one wants scoliosis, but if you're going to have it, it's a great forcing function to have a healthy, consistent practice like yoga.
Actually, one of my favorite parts of the conversation adjacent to the financial planning and the career path, which is coming up a lot right now in financial services, was when she talked about her and her husband and how they navigated the transition to him being the stay-at-home parent and her being the primary breadwinner.
He refers to it as having retired. He's 10 years my senior, so he retired when he was 50. I was like, all right, if you want to call it retired to be the stay-at-home parent to 2 kids, go ahead, but it's not like you're just popping bonbons and knitting all day long.
Yeah. Was that a tough transition for him?
Not in terms of his ego. He is one of the most emotionally self-sufficient people I have ever met. It's really enviable. The relationship between him and me, that was difficult to navigate.
Okay, talk to me about that.
We are very different personalities. I am the planner, as it turns out. I am the very practical one, organized, looking ahead, blah, blah, blah. He is not that as much. He has many fine qualities. And so I'd been more or less the primary parent for years and, running the household for years. And then just on a dime, we switched roles. And we started going to marriage counseling. And I just remember sort of yelling one day in marriage counseling, it's been 4 freaking months that you've been the primary parent. Like, how long does it take to figure out how to make a doctor's appointment? Because I was still sort of carrying a lot of these, what I thought were the primary parent's responsibilities, on top of being stressed out of my gourd about having just launched this brand new financial planning firm. And remember the marriage counselor, one of the things he said was, Meg, how long were you the primary parent? Like, how long did you have to develop all these skills and habits? And I was like, all right, good point, like years. And so that going to marriage counseling, 5 stars, 2 thumbs up. And it wasn't because we were on the verge of divorce or anything like that. We were just having trouble communicating well with one another and navigating this like really big transition in our family and in our relationship. So anyways, that just helped me take a step back and realize like, oh, this is going to be a gradual process. And maybe him realizing what I was still expecting him to do that he didn't have a sense of because he hadn't been the primary parent for years. And I would say sort of the transition was complete after like 2 years. It took 2 years. His role as stay-at-home is not identical to what mine had been. So we've sort of divvied up all the family responsibilities slightly differently, but it's been stable now for about 6 years, if I do that arithmetic right.
That is definitely a fascinating part of the conversation. All things considered, she's a pretty fantastic person in many ways. I would say anyone who has an opportunity to work with her is lucky to have found somebody so grounded and at the same time inspiring and inspired.
What is about financial planning that has kept me in it? 2 things come to mind. One is, I was just thinking about this recently. have you ever thought about the fact that there are so many wonderful books in this world that you will never read them all? In fact, you will never get anywhere close to reading all the wonderful books in this world. That is simultaneously a wonderful and depressing thought, right? Because there are always going to be lots of wonderful books that you will never have a chance to enjoy. I feel the same about financial planning. Maybe part of that is because it's such a new profession that sort of new stuff is being discovered every day about it. But that as much as I learn, I've accumulated a few sets of letters after my name. And, I certainly make an effort to continue educating myself. I'm at that point on the Dunning-Kruger curve where it is obvious to me I am never going to get anywhere close to knowing everything. And that is simultaneously exciting and depressing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason why I think financial planning works for me. And the second is, unlike tech, or at least what I was doing in tech or the companies I was working for in tech, I actually see a tangible, well, maybe not tangible. I see my work improving the world person by person. This person is happier because of this conversation I have just had with them. This person is less stressed out because of this analysis I just did with them. Oh, look at this marriage where they're smiling so delightedly at one another after our conversation. That is so nice to get paid and paid well to have these deep relationships with other human beings and actually see that my work with them is making them happier. And if you want to sort of extrapolate that, like, happier people make for a better world. It is hurt people and desperate people who do bad and desperate things. Now, with a client base of 60 people, I'm not going to have this huge imprint on the world, but I'm making 60 families' lives better. That's pretty lovely.
Yeah, I love it. So, Mark, let's get into it, shall we?
100%. Let's do it.
All right. So, financial planning in your 20s, 30s, 40s, that mid-career area of life, it's a lot. What sticks out to you first? What comes to mind? Where's your mind go with these folks?
Well, it's funny, but a lot of people think that I'm just getting started or mid-career. There's not a lot to talk about. Everybody kind of looks the same. And when you get into this business, and Meg talks to this, is what sticks out is a real financial plan is very custom, even for somebody who's 25 or 28 years old. No one goes through this process the same way at the same time, even though we're going to show a Kitsis diagram later. They might all go through these same points and have the same things happen, but everybody's different. And luck plays a big part in this, and it's corollary unluck. So much so that I just wrote a piece on it, not to support this, but I literally just wrote this. There's an awful lot of it, good and bad, and it gets into every step in the journey. And it doesn't matter if you're 20, 40, 60, or 100.
Yeah, that luck piece I think is hard for people to wrestle with. Either they're anticipating and hoping for good luck because they've done certain things or they experience bad luck. It's pretty random, right? Like the experience of luck or unluckiness.
100%. And
Yeah.
so what we see, and Meg brings it out, is you think about somebody 30 to 45, they're probably feeling pretty prime, right? I got my career going, been out of college 10, 12 years. I'm rocking it. You might be mid 30s to mid 50s, and you appear to be successful. You're maybe making $400,000 a year if you're at the upper end of the spectrum, but yet you look at that diagram, you got all these things to deal with, and you feel poor. And I don't know about you, but I talk to a lot of people who are making, realistically, a lot of money. $67,000 a year is the median income in the United States. Over 200K, you're in the top 10%. And you're making 400K, and it's not on this diagram, but I think you're in like the top 2 or 3%. And you feel poor. Well, you've got all this stuff pulling on you, and you're paying for college. Maybe you're supporting parents, and all of a sudden your effective income is more like 200,000, except you're paying taxes on a $400,000 income. And so, yeah, you're making 400K, and you have, let's call it an S ton of money, realistically compared to the population, but you feel poor.
Yeah, we'll link to that graphic. It's pretty it's pretty helpful just to kind of assimilate yourself in what's normal, what's not, like what's on the range ends. I think for me, seeing some of those numbers that are at the poverty line are a lot lower than what I feel like someone should need to have to live. So it really helps tie your feelings to reality and understand what may be going on under the surface, even though you're making a certain amount of money. We'll link to that. But yeah, the first hurdle that I'm feeling for somebody who's in that place of life is like, you make a lot, you need some help, but help costs money. And to your point, you just said it, you feel poor. So does this feel accurate? Like, do you find that a lot of people in this place that come to you with some money, with some income, also come to you with like a sense of desperation on how to get out of this rat race, this cycle? Where do we go, Mark? What do we start with? What's the first step? Is that kind of where people are showing up with you?
It is completely true. And the age bracket doesn't really matter. I mean, one of our favorite clients here, when they showed up in our office, they were 2-income family, 2 relatively young children, I think 8 and 12. The wife is crying in my office. They're making $425,000 a year. They have $100,000 worth of revolving debt, consumer debt. And she is completely convinced that there's no way out of this cycle. And then credit card debt is just chewing her up.
Yeah.
And of course, they want to dive into the numbers. And of course, we did go into the numbers. And I mean, it's a good story. We ended up wiping out all that debt. And interestingly enough, linking back to Meg and her husband, this woman's husband ended up significantly downsizing his career from a compensation perspective because they figured out that they didn't actually need all that money, that they could live on something different. But all that is outside of the numbers, right? The math doesn't solve your problems. Your behavior solves your problems.
Yeah.
And it's not that the math doesn't illuminate things you need to focus on. None of the math tells you why you're where you are.
Like, even though we are financial planners and we absolutely do the numbers piece of it, like there is still something and some work to be done before you sit down and like just launch into a budget. Like that's not the first conversation you're having with these people that are struggling with revolving credit card debt and income problem, or maybe not even income problems, but just the math problems. Like you're not starting with the budget, right?
Well, yes and no. But
yes
first,
and no?
I'm going to take exception to the word budget.
Yeah.
I don't use it. It has a very negative connotation for a lot of people. What we talk about is spending plans, income plans, and saving plans.
Plans.
I mean, you plan to spend. The question is how much, right? Which in a lot of ways is driven by your plan to save. By the way, all of these are driven by what you really want to do and what matters to you and what you can plan on from an income perspective. But yes, absolutely. To answer the question, we create what I view it. Look, I'm a trained accountant. I never worked as an accountant, but that's my degree. Running a business or running your personal financial life are all the same. You got to have cash flow. I don't care what your net income is. You got to have positive cash flow. Negative cash flow is somewhere along the line a disaster. So the first thing that we do with somebody who has chosen to meet with us is we got to figure out those drivers, right? What's important to you? Out of all the things that are important to you, what is the most important? The reality is we probably can't do everything, at least not off the bat. So we need to understand your money story. What does it mean to you? You know, some people money means a lot. Some people it's like, so what? Some people are scarce in mindset, right? Some people are abundant. But more importantly, what do you want your money, a tool, to accomplish for you? And I know from experience that most everybody, unless they truly have some awful luck, which happens, is capable of having what they want. But not that many people are capable of having everything they want. So again, you might look successful on paper. The hard work isn't necessarily making the money, although earning a $400,000 income in the United States is not an easy thing to do. I don't think it's an easy thing to do anywhere. But prioritizing what goes into your spending plan, right, is not a math problem. It's a principles and values problem. And if we solve that one, the math will work itself out.
I'm going to take a huge risk with our podcast on episode 3. And I am going to talk about Taylor Swift. And I realize this is an absolutely polarizing topic of conversation. But
can we sell tickets? If we could sell tickets, it's probably really profitable for us.
We're either going to get the Swifties on our side or they're going to hate us, or maybe Swifties don't even show up for this conversation in general. I don't know. But if you're listening and you love Taylor Swift, she just released her latest album. And on that album is a song called The Prophecy. And I was listening to it in the car and it struck me because the whole premise behind the song is she's begging the gods to redo the prophecy because she's ended up with a lot of money and fame and she doesn't want any of it. She just wants people who truly love her. And one, there's so many carryovers to that, to the work that we do in financial planning and the people that we talk to and the problems that they have and what they're actually trying to solve for and the life that they want to live, what true wealth is for them. But I brought it up, kind of similar topic with my 16-year-old. We were talking in the car and we were talking about, because she just got a job at Dunkin' Donuts and she's making all this money. She thinks she's just so rich, and she is comparatively to what she was and how much spending money she has. But I told her, we were talking about that.
Can we get Travis Kelce to ask her out on a date?
Yeah. And I was like, babe, you can use this money to have anything you want, but you can't use this money to have everything you want. Like, it's just not possible. It's not even possible for Taylor Swift. And I was talking about this song to her and I was like, she's even realizing like she probably can have anything she wants, but she can't have everything. So for someone who is Taylor Swift to be faced with this reality of not being able to have everything, I think all of us should probably take a piece of wisdom out of that and just realize for ourselves when we're orienting our lives, when we're going into these conversations about money, we can't have it all. We can have what we truly want, but we have to figure out what we truly want first and then go after that.
And a really good example of and I don't know the exact quote, you're best off not criticizing anybody because you don't know what life they're living. You don't know what goes on back there. I mean, I would like to have the challenges that a billionaire has too, but I might not actually want their life. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. A quote that I love, it's coming up in my blog this week. I'm going to use it. I've been thinking a lot about it. Is if everybody in the world were to take their problems and carry them to the middle and drop them in a pile, we'd all look around, grab our own problems back up and walk away again. Like, we don't really want anybody else's problems. At the end of the day, we wouldn't really trade.
I think that's probably true. And it's why nobody wants to hear you bitching about how bad your life is at the moment either, because everybody's is the same.
Yeah, we all got our problems. So we have this awesome graphic that Michael Kitts has put together. We'll include that in the show notes as well. And it depicts the life transitions that drive the need for financial planning advice in baby boomers. So those who are either entering retirement or after, and the following generations. So Generation X, millennials, Gen Z, so forth. And I know if you're listening, you can't see this graphic at the moment. So I'm just going to bring this one statistic out for our conversation right now. On this graphic, there are 15 life transitions. And this is baseline. It's only counting if you have 2 kids. It's not counting a lot of other transitions that could happen. Like, this is just baseline. 15 life transitions for people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and like early 50s versus 3 to 4 life transitions. Like, still baseline because you could include some other unlucky or catastrophic events in there, but 3 to 4 life transitions for people in their 50s to 90s. So it's 5 times more life transitions in those earlier ages. And those are all moments when someone could benefit from financial planning advice during a period of time, traditionally also, where people don't seek out financial planning advice because either culturally or socially, we've not been taught that that's okay to do, or that it's a worthwhile investment of our time and finances to seek that out and to pay someone to help us with those life transitions. So unless they've come into like excess wealth or like inheritance, business success, they traditionally aren't reaching out, even though they have so many moments where great planning could influence their future wealth in a meaningful way. And then another statistic that probably related to that from a Cerulli study that was published this year, 2004, shows that 28% of unadvised consumers perceive working with an advisor as too expensive. So You've got a high amount of uncertainty going on across the board for younger generations, like how to make great decisions, whether you need a financial planner to make those great decisions, whether or not a financial planner is even affordable. So you've got all this uncertainty around all of these things to do with your money and the money decisions. Mark, talk to me about what you see with these younger clients regarding that uncertainty and how they're showing up with you.
Well, you've just highlighted a couple of things, one of which is endemic to the U.S. educational system. But the first one is there's a pretty popular commercial, life comes at you fast.
Yeah,
It does.
it does.
And stuff happens, right? People die, people become disabled. There's this horrible story in DC right now about these 3 professional football players that got killed in an auto accident at 3:00 in the morning. Somebody hit them, drove them off the road. Stuff happens. The second thing is we do a terrible job educating people in the United States on finance, on personal finance, on behavioral finance, on basic things around cash flow and managing a checkbook or electronic checkbook these days. But so yes, we see, and let's understand that the power in compounding is time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If mass equals force times acceleration, wealth equals savings times time.
Time.
And it really is that simple. But when you've got all these things going on, who has time to sit down and think about that?
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to find a way, if we really want to make an impact on the world, to get younger people to understand that there is help available to you. There are planners like Meg who will figure out a way to make it affordable. I mean, we certainly would never turn away somebody that wanted help and was willing to take certain steps because they are facing a high amount of uncertainty. And more importantly, I don't know that they're facing any more uncertainty than I faced when I was 18 or that you did when you were 18, although you obviously are substantially younger than me, but it feels that way.
It does.
And I would postulate that no one is old enough to have seen enough history to understand that the world isn't very different today than it was 50 years ago until you're like 80. And then it's too late. You can't go fix it. I mean, was there a bunch of uncertainty this year around the US election? Sure. We got stuff going on in Gaza. We've got stuff going on in the Ukraine. But I bet if you go pick any 10-year period, go back to 1850, and it's probably all the same. I mean, think about what the U.S. looked like in 1860.
Yeah.
Right? Civil War. Who's going to survive that? End of our country. Well, not exactly. And how about 1939 or 1944? Or worse, 43, when we thought everything was lost. Are you facing uncertainty? Sure. Is it more uncertain than I faced? I don't know. I can't judge. I personally don't believe so. Is it more or less uncertain than what you faced? Again, I don't know. I bet if you ask Jill Lepore, she's a very famous historian, at least to me, she would give you some perspective on that. The point of it is the fundamental things you need to do, whether you're 20, 30, 40, or 80, are primarily the same. The only difference when you're 80 is you're generally decumulating, right? You're spending it instead of saving it. So that looks a little different. But the fundamentals, when you're 20, what's the primary fundamental? Spend less than you make. And if you do that, you will never be poor. Now, how much less than you make will drive how wealthy you become.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a habit of spending less than you make, you are never going to be poor. Now, when you're 80, you just need to spend what you make. Now, many people, if they've saved well, can spend more than they make. But the fundamental rules are the same, right? So, yes, you can get going when you're younger. No, it doesn't have to be complicated. No, it doesn't have to be expensive. But the wealthier you get, the more expensive it gets. And it's not because I can charge a higher fee. It's because your life is more complicated. And your advisor has to do more work.
How, because I know a big part of the picture is trust, right? Yeah, when there's a lack of information, lack of education, the stakes are even higher, I think, when it comes to finding someone that you can trust and working with a financial advisor that you trust.
100% true.
So there's a lot of charlatans out there. There's definitely a difference. And I think maybe in a point that needs to be educated even further is there's a difference between planning and products in the industry. And I think when younger people are looking for financial advice, sometimes the advice is positioned and pitched to them as products because they don't have as much investable money. So I guess the financial services industry has flipped it into how we charge is through providing a product or selling a product versus charging through managing the money that you do have. And I think that gets really difficult for some of the younger generations to tease out when they're looking for advice and they're looking for planning. So how would you suggest they navigate that in a way that protects them and keeps them in line with really seeking out professionals who are going to help?
Well, trust is the word. And, figuring out who you can trust is obviously difficult. If it was easy, our world would be a very different place. But what I would say to you is, my experience in doing this in my career have run a couple of different pricing models. So I'm as guilty as maybe anybody of promoting one versus the other over time. But what I've come to really center on is what you're looking for is advice. Mm-hmm. So what you should be paying for is advice. Yeah. And if somebody says your advice is free, it's covered in because we have this product and you need this product. I don't know that I would run screaming, but I would look at it very carefully. And I would try and separate out if I was a client in this business right now and 25 years old and just coming out of college and starting to earn a decent living, is I would be looking for somebody who is focused on giving me advice. And if I need a lot of advice, then I should be willing to pay for, look, a decent attorney these days is $500 an hour. Any kind of decent professional is that. Your doctor is earning that much. If you've got a really good financial advisor, it's not going to be cheap. Now, as advisors, we can craft models so that we don't have to charge everybody $500 an hour. And maybe you package it up, in some sort of flat fee or subscription arrangement. But you should be paying for advice. And then when you need product, you pay for the product.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a big fan of of an advisor not taking an income stream off of product sales. Because I don't care who you think you are. I do know how the brain works. And there are people like Megan Lurtz and Brian Portnoy and Lisa Feldman Barrett who know a lot better how the brain works. But you cannot avoid being persuaded by those incentives. And if you think you're immune to that, that's just the way money works. You're not. So if I'm a client, I'm like, okay, I want to pay for advice. I'm willing to pay a fee for advice. And then when I need products, it's not that the advisor can't recommend them. They can. I just don't want that advisor to draw an income stream off of those products. And as you evolve and you become wealthier, it can just be a lot simpler and easier and friction-free for the advisor to take their fee off investments. It's just simpler. And actually, people prefer it mentally. That fee just comes out. But that fee shouldn't be driven by any products. You should ask your advisor very carefully if they're getting any incentive for the products that they're using. And that's, I think, how you tease that out and make sure that your advisor is delivering you advice. Because a real fiduciary is acting in your best interest, period, all the time. I do not understand the 500-page and 1,200-page fiduciary rules. It's pretty simple. What constitutes a fiduciary is well-defined in our court system. And the way I look at it is, if I'm your advisor, my job is to give you the very best advice I can give you. And I need to stand in your shoes as best I can. Everything else should be off the table. And people like Meg do that. I think you'll see that when you listen to her.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we need to continue to do our part in the wealth management industry to raise the tide, to partner with clients and provide that meaningful guidance, that advice that will support them through these transitions. And then we also, like as a part of this podcast, we want to encourage everyone out there to do your homework and to ask your financial advisor, if you have one, very careful questions. And we're going to provide a list of questions in the show notes that you can look through. And if you already have a financial advisor, don't be afraid to go back to them and ask them these questions if you don't know the answer to them. If you don't have one yet, as you're interviewing and looking for a financial advisor, use these questions as a way to guide you towards someone who is providing you advice, who you are paying to get their advice. And then at that point in time, when you've separated it out that way, it should be easy to determine whether or not they're someone that you can trust? Do you trust their advice? Your heart, your gut should guide you, should be able to guide you in the direction of yes or no, I do trust this person or don't, versus whether or not this person is selling a product that would be good for me or not. That's difficult. It's difficult to know whether and to include like trust as a variable in whether or not a product is right for you or not. Start with the person you can trust, then follow their advice, see that their advice works, move into the products. And like you said, purchase products that you need. But I agree with you, keeping that separate and buying them not from your financial advisor, but from maybe one of their trusted recommendations, but not in a way that would compensate your financial advisor secondarily to you paying them for advice.
And again, this may all be done through your advisor. The question is how they're being compensated.
Yeah, exactly.
And your advisor, if they're not transparent about that, if you've got any hemming or hawing about how they're getting compensated, now I would run screaming. And it also brings to mind an old tenant from the Navy, right? Trust but verify.
Trust but verify. Right? That's right.
I get your trust, but verify. And if your advisor is offended because you're verifying, that's a red flag to me too. That being said, I think that about wraps it up for today. Special thanks to Meg for sharing her journey with us. And thanks to all of you who are listening in.
A big thanks to our amazing guests who agreed to join us on a journey through their career stories on How Did We Get Here?
If you've enjoyed the laughs, surprises, and unexpected turns, be sure to hit subscribe for more intriguing tales.
Your support means the world to us.
Until the next episode, keep asking, keep exploring, and keep wondering,
how did we get here? This podcast is not intended as and may not be considered to be investment advice and does not constitute a recommendation of any investment strategy or product for a particular investor. The information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up to date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy or sell the investments mentioned. Investors should consult a financial professional before making any investment decisions. The opinions are those of the host and interviewees at the time of the podcast recording and are subject to change. These comments should not be construed as recommendations, but as an illustration of broader themes. Forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future results. They involve risks, uncertainties, and assumptions. There can be no assurance that actual results will not differ materially from expectations. Investments involve varying degrees of risks, and there can be no assurance that any specific investment or strategy will be suitable or profitable for our client's portfolio. All investment strategies can result in profit or loss. Just Boss is an investment advisor representative of Wealth Tech Partners, LLC, DBA, Lake Avenue Financial, which is a registered investment advisor and only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Mark Newfield is an investment advisor representative of Journey Strategic Wealth, which is a registered investment advisor and only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Registration as an investment advisor is not an endorsement of the firm by securities regulators and does not mean the advisor has achieved a specific level of skill or ability. The firm is not engaged in the practice of law or accounting. You should always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation.